Hello and welcome back to Faces of the MRM. I have a very special guest today. This really kind of is the big one. We have Timothy Golditch. He is the vice president of the NCFM, the National Coalition for Men. He's one of the legends in the men's rights community, and he is a personal hero of mine. He's a very wise man who has taught me a lot, and it's honestly an honor to have you on the channel. So, Timothy, thank you very much for being here, and welcome.
Well, thank you, Thomas. That's awesome. I'm glad to be here.
So you're the vice president of the NCFM, and you have published a book on gender equality.
Yes, called Loving Men, Respecting Women, the Future of Gender Politics.
And the book has, and I read it, by the way, it's fantastic. I'm going to link it down below. I fully recommend it. The book has a preface from Warren Farrell, who is seen as, by many, as kind of the godfather of the modern day men's rights movement.
Yes, indeed. It was a great honor for Warren to write that for my book, yes.
And it kind of says a lot about you and your legitimacy that Warren Farrell would choose to preface your book.
Well, I like to think so.
Oh, I have no doubt about it. So you have a very interesting take, very sophisticated take, I think, on gender equality. And what's interesting is that you don't approach men's rights and the men's rights movement solely from the male perspective. You kind of look at the bigger picture as a whole, and you look at the gender balance between men and women. And you call yourself a gender equalist as your preferred label.
That's right.
Can you tell us a little bit about that theory and what you have in your book?
Well, I'd say it begins with the basic premise is that throughout history, men have been more respected but less loved, women more loved but less respected. And while this is a very imperfect kind of a system, a gender system, I believe that it was a balanced system. I basically believe that woman is and has always been equal partner in the human system, playing an equal overall force of influence and therefore equally responsible for outcomes. So I really see woman and man as equal partners, and where everybody sees a patriarchy, I see a patramatrix, a male-female consensus. And in looking at gender in this way, there are no villains exactly. You see, there's no one to blame. Woman and man co-created the gender system and co-equal co-partnership, because out of the deal, each sex got what it wanted most. And for each, for man, his particular brand of self-sacrifice, he earned the lion's share of the respect, and woman, for her particular brand of self-sacrifice, she earned the lion's share of the love. And it was kind of like a contract. Each sex fulfilled its end and earned its rewards fair and square. So there's ways of looking at this whole gender reality and gender politics in a whole new way that is a whole lot less toxic and does not involve what I'll call a moral polarity. You see, as soon as we believe the men have the power and women are the victims, from there it goes inexorably to man bad, the over-empowered oppressor, victimizer, woman good, the innocent victim. And that's not only is that just a cartoon version of gender reality, not only is it just one-sided and therefore false, it's poisonous. So
if I can, what I like about it, the difference between what you're saying and how feminists describe patriarchy is, in the feminist model of patriarchy exists the concept of male privilege.
Yeah.
In your model, you're saying how men were more respected but less loved, and that's why it was easier for society to send young men, young conscripts drafted against their will, to go and die into war.
Yeah, now, die in hard hazardous labor, and to overflow the homeless and the imprisoned. Yeah, right.
Now, feminists would say, well, we acknowledge this, and we say that patriarchy hurts men too.
Right.
But they still have this concept of male privilege.
Well, that's because they don't recognize female power. The only female power that's recognized are like female senators and CEOs, but those are women that just happen to be wielding a high-end form of male power. Female power is comprised of things like beauty and sexual power, moral authority, motherhood power, the greater power to elicit empathy, the greater power to inflict shame. There are a whole host of female powers.
Yeah.
And
When you say, I just want to say real fast, when you say elicit empathy, I'll also link this below. There's a study that has shown, it's called the Women Are Wonderful effect, that has shown that both men and
Alice
women
Eagley, yeah.
are more intrinsically empathetic toward women than men in identical situations.
Yes, yes,
It's been
clearly.
tested.
Obviously, yeah. So male privilege, okay, that's fine. But then there's female privilege also. And from a
And
gender
what is privileged about going to war? I mean, what's privileged about being forced into battle? What's privileged about having the more dangerous jobs? I mean, the things that feminists say are the results of patriarchy, none of those align with privilege in any way.
well, feminism views men in a manner that's, shall we say, lacking empathy. So, but the way that translates into a respect for men is men are still like the adults, the ones held accountable. So it's like men are like the parents, you see, and this view of patriarchy, which literally means rule by fathers, it views men as the ones who are ultimately responsible and held accountable. And there is actually respect in that. And women are sorely lacking this respect. This is the female version of victimization. And read someone like Camille Paglia, she'll go in real depth about how this whole system infantilizes women. Feminism infantilizes women. And it starts with a withhold of accountability, which is a withhold of respect. Feminism paints women just as victimized in everything, the powerless victims in all things, which is not only self-fulfilling emotionally, but it's also living a lie. It's just not the way it is.
It's interesting to me that the default position of men's rights activists is equality and equal treatment and equal standards. Whereas when you look at what some feminist organizations, and I'm gonna segue into talking about feminism just in a little bit, because I know we're criticized often as MRAs for being highly critical of feminism, but let me just say, MRAs don't support any gendered laws. We don't support any laws or any models that treat men and women differently. But when you look at issues like homelessness or domestic violence or healthcare, feminist organizations rather, do support laws that by default treat men and women differently. This is something that men's rights activists virtually never do. Our positions are almost always that equality is best.
Well, the reason for this is that feminism views itself as a corrective. It begins with the premise that men have the power and women are the victims, and therefore positions itself as a force that seeks equality by correcting what it imagines is an imbalance. But you see, it's only looking at gender realities that plays out along the respect axis. It's not looking at how gender reality plays out along the love axis, and therefore it's not seeing the mirror opposite female power and male victimization. So it only sees, basically feminism is a presentation of half of gender reality. It's the male power, female victimization, half of gender reality, presented and demanded to be accepted as if it were gender reality in its entirety. And position stuff like that, you see, it's all feminism is the corrective, and therefore any effort feminism makes to take power or punish man bad, the overempowered oppressor victimizer, and reward and extra protect and advantage woman good, the innocent victim, will be seen as leading to equality.
So yeah, I mean, I agree. And to that point, one of the criticisms that the men's rights movement gets and that MRAs get very frequently, I mean, this has been asked of myself hundreds, if not thousands of times, is how come you guys focus so much on feminism? How come it seems like the men's rights movement is just a reactionary movement against feminism? Why don't you talk just about men's issues? Why do you have to be so anti-feminist? And my response is it's kind of impossible to talk about gender equality and men's issues and not address the dominant power, the dominant entity in the conversation,
My
which
God,
is
yeah.
feminism.
Well,
The
look at it this way, in the realms of gender uh, conflict and complaint, gender activism and advocacy, gender defining, gender issues, gender studies, gender politics, gender anything. There is feminism on the one hand, and on the other hand, there is sort of like nothing. That makes gender politics a one-party system, and feminism a kind of ideological dictatorship. There's no way to discuss gender without dealing with feminism. It's such an absolute dominant dictatorship in anything to do with gender.
I mean, how could we not talk about feminists when feminists, I mean, I know you know this even more than I do, feminists will attack a men's rights activist constantly. You cannot even identify as an MRA without getting attacked by feminists.
That's right.
Cassie J had bomb threats,
Terrible.
protests. So
Yes.
if an MRA simply exists and even says, hey, I'm a men's rights activist, I want to talk about men's issues, they will inevitably be attacked by feminists.
Well, that's right. And there's a reason for that too. Feminism is all powerful, but it's also extremely vulnerable. It's based on a lie. It's based on the lie that men have the power and women are the victims, and therefore feminism is needed as a corrective. That's a lie, and therefore it's a house of cards. And you see, feminism is guilty of an astonishing array of intellectual crimes, and not just misdemeanors. I'm talking major crimes, just in terms of what it has done to sabotage boys in school, what it has done to defame the character of men and masculinity, what it has done in terms of the wedge that is created between women and men. And you see, if feminism's premise is false, then you see what is to respect, what is to admire, what is to revere in woman, in a world where both sexes suffer. A woman standing there and saying, only I suffer. My pain is special. I deserve all empathy, caring, concern, compassion directed just to me exclusively. You see, once the house of cards falls, if feminism becomes really subject to critique, it's no wonder feminism is running scared. Do you see the potential for what could happen if the lace curtain were opened and the other half of gender reality were allowed in? Feminists and feminism wouldn't just be embarrassed; it would be exposed as, well, something very bad.
And the thing is, it's like the difference between MRAs and feminists is we don't even say that feminism shouldn't exist. What we criticize are the specific actions and words of specific feminist organizations. And a point that I often make is that when we say that feminists are bad and feminism is bad, what we're talking about are specific feminists or feminist organizations that have said and done bad things. But the problem is these feminists are typically the ones who are part of these political lobby groups that have the most influence. The average feminist who's just walking down the street, who's just a decent person who believes in equality, we're not talking about you. We understand that you don't hate men, you don't support sexism against men, but you have to look at what these political groups are doing. Look at some of the lawsuits the National Organization for Women, now NOW, have been involved in. Look at some of the things that they fought against. And I will give them credit. It's funny because NCFM and now we actually came together and we were in agreement over selective service. So I will
Yes, basically,
absolutely,
yes, that's right.
I will give credit where credit is due. And I've noticed that's the biggest difference between MRAs and feminists is that we do not see it as all or nothing. We do not see it as a zero-sum game. We are willing to accept elements of feminism. We are willing to accept that misogyny exists. We are willing to accept that women's issues exist. And we are willing to accept that women deserve their own movement to address their own issues.
Absolutely. If feminism would simply present itself as a special interest group that advocated on behalf of women and women's issues, I have no problem with that. It's just that what's deadly about it is it presents its half of gender reality as if it were gender reality in its entirety. And that's what makes even the everyday feminist is naive. She thinks she's working toward equality, but oh boy, equality. Well, that's all right, let's go down that rabbit hole.
Men are behind in school, men are behind in employment, men are behind
Yeah.
in life expectancy, men are behind in homelessness, men are behind when it comes to pension ages. I mean, there's so many issues that feminism.
Basically, yeah, men suffer comparison with women in virtually every measure of well-being. That's true, and it's because men are less loved that these issues of men remain non-issues.
And I've noticed this, especially when I'm on a place like Reddit, which tends to lean left or tends to lean pro-feminist, people's absolute inability to recognize discrimination against men and the way people will justify an imbalance against men. It's so strange. It's like we really are hardwired, and it goes back
Yeah.
to the empathy gap. People are psychologically unable to recognize discrimination against men equally to discrimination against women.
Yeah, it's
That's
the
what-
empathy gap, and there's an instinctual component to it, definitely. I mean, if you want to go all the way back to the biological floor, there are reasons why for small group survival that birthing females would be prioritized in terms of safety and well-being. That's a whole story, though. That's about a half hour to go into that one.
Yeah.
But the uptake is that, to put it in simplest terms, again, men more loved but more respected but less loved, women more loved but less respected. And it goes back to some very archetypal, primal, instinctual elements, and is also in accord with Eros, with the erotic. You see the story of the hot hunky hero, the empowered alpha male coming to the rescue of the sweet, weak, demure, beautiful, innocent damsel in distress, is an erotic story. And it would seem that instinct and Eros simply outweigh fact and logic.
And that's a story that's reverberated through so many cultures and so many societies pretty much throughout history. You go back thousands of years from antiquity, you can go anywhere in the world and you can find some version of that story.
That's right.
And it's very much men are more respected and less loved. Women are more loved and less respected.
Yeah.
And now that we have a modern world where women can go to college and start businesses and men can stay at home and care for children, it's confusing for people. And
so this love respect dynamic, we need to understand it and see it historically, because it makes it possible, at least we can imagine a future where woman and man might call it even, looking at this whole gender system throughout history and seeing it as a product of an equal partnership between woman and man, what I call a patromatrocensus, a male-female consensus. And then what we do in the future, you see, what's really essential is that the future of gender politics and gender relations are built upon an even foundation. If we build the future of gender politics on man bad, the overempowered oppressor, victimizer, woman good, the innocent victim, we're building on a false and poisonous foundation. Nothing good can come of that.
And I just say, just so it's very clear,
Yeah.
when I said it's confusing for people, I'm not defending gender roles. I'm against gender roles. There's nothing wrong with a woman having the career and the man being the breadwinner. Personally,
Right.
I think in today's world, 2 incomes is better than 1. So I would prefer, in my relationship, both of us to have an income. But the reason why it's confusing to people is because we've been conditioned to believe that there should be an issue or a controversy with the man staying at home and the woman being the breadwinner. MRAs are saying that there's absolutely nothing wrong with that. And there shouldn't have been a controversy in the first place because, as you say, the way we see gender roles is poison. And feminists would
Yeah,
agree.
and I would add though to that though, historically, gender roles have made sense. They were efficient. Gender roles brought a measure of clarity into a pre-science world where we didn't
Right.
understand anything. It gave a certain predictability to the world. It served its purpose. We don't need to demonize it for the past.
Right.
We need to look at it now,
If you
present and the future.
if you were to go back to ancient times, in the context of ancient times, it made sense.
It did.
It's survival.
That's right. Men and women paired together for survival. And that was the name of the game in the brutal past, just trying to survive. And it wasn't easy to survive. And most people didn't past, 35 or whatever. So when survival was the name of the game, women and men working together in a complementary way.
Yeah. So, what do you think is the future for the men's rights movement in the next, let's say, 5 to 10 years? Do you see things as, because I see things as becoming generally better. I think things
My hope is that men will use their instinctual, women work the powers that they have to elicit more empathy. I would have men step up and take leadership. That's how we use our end of the instinctual spectrum. I would like to think of the men's movement as taking an approach that gender politics is broken. Let's fix it. And I would have men take leadership, but lead wisely. Let's not oust women from victim and center seat just so that man can sit there instead. Let's lead wisely with a new gender politics that is gender neutral and balanced and sustainable and healthy. And that's what I would hope that the men's movement would do.
and just to be clear, just so no one can spin what you're saying in a negative way, when you say men take leadership, you mean men stepping up within the men's rights movement. You're not saying that, a woman shouldn't be president.
No.
Right. Just
no.
I know that. I'm just making sure that.
Yeah. No. Thank you for that, for the clarity. Yeah. It's right. It's tricky. It's basically like a Jordan Peterson sort of model. I mean, here's a man who simply through his talent, his intellect, his brilliance, his very high level of integrity, his very high level of maturity, takes a leadership role. He doesn't seize power in the sense of some violent takeover. I mean, he just presents in such a way that people want to follow him.
And just like I would say that a women's rights movement should be led by women.
Yeah, and of course it always has been. Yeah.
So it's just saying that I think if you have a special interest group like feminism or like the men's rights movement.
So what I would like to see the men's movement do, you see, is basically present men's issues as that which goes on the other end of a balance beam.
Right.
You see, and a lot of MRAs get worked up about that, but they don't need to be, because you can take this side, this female power male victimization half, and you can stack it as high as you want. You can stack it right up to the ceiling and beyond if you want. It's just that when presented then with, well, now you're making it look like men are the victims, what I would have the men's movement say in response is, well, we're willing to call it even if you are. What do you say?
Exactly. Exactly. And I get criticized for that. I get some people say that I'm too soft on feminists. They say that, oh, you should be more critical in your tone. And I say, no, no, no. We have to understand that this is about finding the balance. So we should be offering an olive branch. And I think that what your approach is very much that. I mean, you're not saying that feminists are wrong for highlighting misogyny. You're saying that, okay, women's issues exist. We recognize this.
Yeah,
However, let's look realistically at what men's issues are. Okay,
yeah.
let's look at the statistics and the data, and let's bring it all together, and let's find a model that treats everybody equally and fairly.
That's the dream.
That's the dream. So, and again, I can't recommend your book strongly enough. If anyone wants to read it, it's in the description. Please do give it a read. So let me ask you something that I probably should have asked in the very beginning. What was your introduction to the men's rights movement? What brought you into the MRM?
Well, it was getting beat up by feminist rhetoric. It was being a part of a group of women, and they were all, back in those days, you just call them women's studies graduates, and they kept beating me up with their rhetoric, and I just thought there's got to be another side to this.
You said you told me that you were part of a group of women, and you were kind of the honorary male.
Yeah, kind of, right. And maybe they let their guard down, and I was privy to their, the kind of things that maybe they wouldn't want men to hear. It was pretty rough. I'm not saying that some woman who is a honorary member of some group of men would, have the same reaction. But when she went to the bookstore looking for the other half of what's going on, she would see the women's section in the bookstore, and there'd be a library full of feminist literature to read. I went and found only books by Morton Downey Jr. and Rush Limbaugh, which did not support a politicized male perspective one bit. And so I thought, if nobody's going to write this book, I'll write it. Now, of course, wonderful books did exist back then in the late 80s and early 90s. They were just obscure, though, and I didn't find them. But later, after I was already invested in writing the book that became Loving Men, Respecting Women, The Future of Gender Politics, I found like the myth of male power.
Right.
And, that just blew the lid off everything. I mean, that was incredible.
If the best you can find is Rush Limbaugh, then
Yeah, right. Exactly.
Is obviously lacking.
Oh, it
Thank
just
God
made
for
me
Warren
all the angrier, This would seem to be saying not only do men not have a point of view, but if they did, it would be absurd.
Right. Yeah. And
So,
it is, I mean, I do think things are changing. I do compare the men's rights movement. I remember 10 years ago when I first started getting into this, that the men's rights movement was basically nothing. It was completely fringe. It had no mainstream presence, and most people had no clue what it is.
right.
And then I remember between 2014 and 2018, men's rights activists were absolutely despised. And you couldn't even enter a room and say you were an MRA without getting an extremely hostile response. But then in the last 3 years, I've noticed it's slowly but surely beginning to change. And people are kind of beginning to realize, okay, there is an issue with discrimination against men. And there is an issue with sexism against men that we just kind of accept as normal. But people are unwilling to make that leap into saying, okay, maybe we need a men's movement. Maybe we need a specific, and people are still so stuck on this idea that men are in power, therefore a men's movement isn't valid.
Right.
What do you think we can do to kind of break that mindset or change that mindset?
How you just understand it better. Yeah, men have the male power. Yeah, sure. If you're just going to look at as power as it exists in male power, then yeah, fine, men have the power. But if you look at the other half of gender reality, you look at female power, and what that's comprised of, and beauty and sexual power and moral authority and motherhood power and Greater power to elicit empathy. That's the power that raises only female concerns to the level of major societal concerns. An incredible power to shame. All these things, these female modes of power. Then you aren't so anxious to take power away from men when you realize that both sexes have power.
Right. Right. And you're not saying that we should have these rigid gender roles. You're just saying that when you examine history, these gender roles developed as a response to the circumstances. And now that we're in a modern world, we can examine these gender roles and reevaluate them differently with a modern perspective.
Yeah, as long as we reevaluate them fairly and evenly and in a balanced way.
Which
Right.
makes which to me makes perfect sense. So Tim, I mean, I've talked to you so many times before, and yet I've still learned something. Every time I talk to you, I learn something, but something I gotta ask. I can't decide whether to keep the beard and the mustache or not. Because it's like some girls seem to like clean shaven, and some girls seem to like a
Yeah.
little bit of hair. So every time you go on a first date or a Tinder date, it feels like a coin flip. It's like a roll of the dice. You never know which one you should do. Should I shave?
Well, in my judgment, Thomas, I think the beard is good.
I think see, and that's the thing. Like I've dated some girls who like love the beard, but then I've dated girls who like don't like the beard like at all. So it's like, you never know. It's
You
like
never know.
where you should go.
You never know.
But this was amazing. I have to tell you, this was fantastic. I'm again gonna say your book is incredible, and again, it's linked below. I can't wait for your next one. Put me on your pre-sale list, please. And yeah, I think that I think things are getting better slowly but surely in the whole manosphere, men's movement, whatever you want to call it. I do think that people are beginning to realize that there is a need for a men's movement, even though there is still a lot of hostility and criticism towards the men's movement. I think things are slowly but surely getting better, and my out view for the future is an optimistic one.
Well, I look at it like this. There's no doubt that awareness and comprehension of this other half of gender reality is definitely on the rise. No doubt about it. And for this very reason, feminism is doubling down. It's becoming more rigid, more hostile. And there's even some risk that talk like we just had right now would be forbidden as a kind of hate speech. Feminism has everything on the line, as I talked about earlier. It has much to fear. It is very vulnerable, and it's not going to go out without a fight. My understanding is that the young of today are increasingly skeptical of it. I've had some concern.
50, I would say 50%. There was a study recently. 50% of British males between 16 and 24 feel that feminism has gone too far. And of the other 50%, they're split roughly 50-50 about whether feminism is good or bad, or good or not sure. So 50% say feminism is bad, about 30% say feminism is good, and about 20% are undecided.
Yeah, so that house of cards that feminism is built on is poised to collapse. I have some concern with just how ruthless feminism might become in its effort to save itself. Let's not forget that it is a multi-billion-dollar industry. It does have instinct and eros on its side. It's congruent with instinct and eros, and that makes it very powerful. I have no doubt that truth will out in the long run. I don't know how long it will take, though, before those forces will be overcome. I see also some young people out there that are very critical of the so-called manosphere. They're getting big numbers out there in the world of YouTube and so on, social media. I don't know them. They're
But those people, they link the incel movement with the men's rights movement. There's no real connection at all.
No, I know, but
It's
that's what they do to
that's what they do, yeah.
decry the whole idea of a male perspective. They lump everything together: MGTOW and incel and
Red
what
pill and everything else.
red pill, yeah, pickup artist, PUA, all of that gets lumped into the politicized men's movement, which has really nothing to do with any of that stuff.
And what feminist would criticize a female pickup artist? That's a question that I've never heard someone ask. If women made videos on how to make themselves more attractive to men, what feminist would criticize them for it? They would say, oh, she's sexually liberated. And she's right. I don't think we should be demonizing someone attempting casual sex unless they're doing it for nefarious purposes. But that could be its own video in its own right. Anyway, Tim, I got to say, this was unbelievable. This was absolutely fantastic. It was an absolute pleasure and honor having you on. I am going to go on your pre-sale list for your next book. I cannot wait. What's it called, the next book you said?
So the next book is going to be called Equal Partners, The History of Gender Equality. So it goes all the way back to the Pleistocene and takes a look at how these gender roles got formed, what was the impetus, what was the biology behind these things, and right through to the ancient world, Rome,
Right.
Middle Ages, Renaissance. It gets up to approximately 1800.
Okay. Okay. Wow. I can't wait. I can't wait. I can't wait. Okay. Okay. So everybody, please do check the links below. I've linked the National Coalition for Men. I have linked Tim's website and Tim's book. This is the Faces of the Men's Rights Movement server. And basically what this is about is really looking at the faces behind the men's rights movement. Who are we? What do we believe? What is a men's rights activist? Who is a men's rights activist? You're looking at one of the greatest men's rights activists of all time. And hopefully you enjoyed this interview. I will see you next time.